I'm Robert Lundberg, and I'm from China Lion Film, and my title is COO.
Well, Robert, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. So my first question is, can you just tell us a little bit about your role there at China Lion Film?
Sure. So I've been with the company for about 9 years, and I think being a small company, from anytime we're dealing with something over 9 years, you start doing a lot of roles, and you take on a lot of roles. And I think everyone in my company does that. So do I. I do a couple things. First and foremost, I handle the operational role. I advise our CEO and president, Jiang Yaming, who shares his time between Beijing and Los Angeles, on what he may ask of me. But then in addition, I book movie theaters. I look at acquisitions, what we would bring on and how we would release it. And then also, just kind of what markets we play in based on the strengths of the film. Is the film a good genre for a particular market, for a particular city? We do release in the U.S. and Canada and the U.K., so not everything fits everywhere. And then, I also handle accounts. I make sure that we get paid. And probably the most important thing I do is I make sure that when we get paid, if there's a success, we make sure that we share that success with whoever the creator is. And so in the long term, I hope my role is to introduce probably more films and experiences that perhaps are not generally seen over here in North America and the UK.
So more like reaching out into the multicultural market too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's also one where it was previously severely underserved, and thankfully, even though there's a long way to go, we're doing over at China Line our little bit to try and help that along.
And so what kind of demands have you seen over time for the multicultural market in your client side?
Well, if you're looking at from an advertising standpoint, I think demand is based on need, and I would almost categorize it into kind of two camps. There's what I like to call the FitWs, which are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then WeChat and Weibo, and then you could add on to that kind of the pay-per-click ads as well. And then there's the kind of new and experimental. Things like Snapchat or Vero, or even to a certain extent VR and AI. But we're seeing a demand for just trying to interpret that data. We as a company, we need to make sure that our first weekend is served perfectly with our audience, because if that first weekend doesn't work out, we lose theaters, we lose advertisers, we lose just essentially support in our space that we live in, and we need to make sure that it's a success. And so the only way we can do that is by taking our subsequent marketing campaigns and adding to them in the future, by interpreting the data that we get from them. And our biggest issue is always it's data overload almost. And so we see a demand, because that's what we're looking for in trying to interpret both those FitWs and then the upcoming new and experimental, or whatever that next social media platform, be it House Party or Marco Polo or what have you, to see if that works for us based on the numbers, or if we should stick to kind of the more traditional ones.
And with all the technology changes and all the advancement in social media alone, have you seen the demand change in any way?
Yeah, I think, again, just having been with the company for 9 years, you see this kind of timeline of, when we started, we were doing 90% of newspaper and magazine, believe it or not, and it's completely flipped to where we barely do 10% of traditional media. Now we still do certain outdoor, we still do certain mall, still do certain out of the home marketing, but I think we're always looking at how do we reach our audience, and if we have people who can at least interpret the data on our FitWs, or we can look at the new and experimental ways of trying to reach our audience, especially from a generational standpoint, which is now the next big thing. We used to focus on millennials, and now it's on to Generation Z, and then it turns into what's next. And I could say that same thing about the demand for certain information on platforms, meaning, are we talking about AI and VR? Now, AI isn't necessarily there or where it needs to be right now, but it is still a very good tool, and we find that there is a demand, both from us and from our competitors, of how to interpret that data, and at least AI can do a certain amount of that.
And actually, I noticed there's some commercials in VR now too, which is
Yeah, it's
Interesting at
amazing.
the same point, right?
Interesting
So,
and amazing.
yeah.
But does it work? I mean, it's all about matter of, is there enough of an audience accessing it? Do they have the tools to access it properly? Are we as a company able to actually utilize it to its fullest extent to attract people to go see our movies or our audiences? Yeah.
And a lot of times I notice the ads are in language, and people who don't understand, it's like, is it invading my environment inside my
That's a
VR?
good point. No, that's true.
Right?
That's true.
So that's one of my things that I'm a huge VR.
Oh,
fanatic,
listen,
so.
it's going to be the absolute future, and we're going to have to. There's going to be a learning curve. I mean, it's just like anything. Multicultural marketing is an example. There's such a harsh learning curve that corporate America has to get on very quickly, but inevitably lags behind. And I'm sure VR will be the exact same way.
And does that affect the film distribution?
Well, it does and it doesn't. I would say VR, if we're looking at kind of a corporate understanding, it's up to the smaller companies to try and be a little bit more nimble and actually advance that cause and teach our corporate partners that these are valuable tools. But from a corporate standpoint, I think they still, it's 0 to 60. You're either stopped or you're driving really fast in the corporate world, and if you don't serve enough of an audience, then it doesn't matter you don't need to drive 0 miles an hour. You got to wait till it's ready to go and open up the road at 60 miles an hour.
So, all right. So, is there anything that you'd like to share in terms of what you think we can do as a community to help continue the growth in the Asian American entertainment consumptions?
Yeah, I mean, if the goal is Asian entertainment consumption, I think there's a handful of things, and first and foremost, just everyone who I've discussed, here at this conference or associated with the conference, is doing the right thing. You have a sponsorship, you have support, you have everyone who is working towards kind of a one pure goal. But then the other thing I would think, and I'm sure this is something everyone's said before a million times, but it's very apropos, is that you can use that very real consumer dollar and show what consumption you want. And I use Netflix as an example a lot. I remember years ago in another life when I was an independent producer, we were pitching a project to Netflix, and they were telling us just how extremely valuable their data was, because A, they had the money to act, and B, they had the data to show that they could make what an audience demands if there is that demand. And I think if you look at something like Always Be My Maybe, or To All the Boys I've Loved, you're seeing films on Netflix that perhaps otherwise wouldn't have been made in this traditional studio system. And yet, if Netflix sees the data and that people are watching, they will make more of those very positive representations. Again, with something like all this data overload, there are people who are paying really close attention to it that can really influence the way Asian consumption happens and change kind of what we see in this world and what is on television, what's on the movies, that's more representative of what the space we live in.
And I think we're starting to see that change now slowly too.
True. No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very exciting time because we're also seeing narratives that, we haven't seen before, that we should have seen before, that also just make for a better environment. Who wants to see the same old story all the time? I think the fact that we are seeing new stories that perhaps are being exposed to the rest of America is a really good thing.